His eyes landed on Mira first, then on Ethan. He knew exactly what his son was about to ask. "This conversation is over," Richard said firmly, but Ethan shook his head weakly. "No, it's just beginning." Richard's face hardened. Moreau, the morning after everything was revealed, felt heavy for everyone at the hospital. The air itself felt tight, as if it knew there were truths waiting to rise to the surface. Mira woke up early, even though she had barely slept. Her mind kept replaying the moment Ethan opened his eyes and spoke those same 4 words she whispered days earlier. She felt like she had been holding her breath ever since. Her small apartment was still dark, and the quiet outside made her thoughts even louder. She kept asking herself the same question. What would happen next? She had expected trouble. She didn't know trouble would carry the weight of a whole billionaire's world on its back. She got ready slowly, trying to keep her hands steady. The hospital uniform she wore almost every day felt heavier today, like it had absorbed the tension of everything that happened. Before leaving, she paused in front of the small mirror by the door. She saw someone who looked tired, but determined. Someone who had carried secrets since childhood was suddenly being pulled back into a past she tried to forget. At the hospital, the hallways were strangely quiet. People whispered in corners, glancing around as if something big were about to occur. They had all heard that Ethan Marlowe, the millionaire's son, had finally come out of his coma. Some were celebrating. Some were scared. A few were wondering how a janitor had anything to do with the whole thing. Mira kept her eyes forward and walked to her station. She hoped she could slip through the day unseen. But of course, with everything that had happened, that was only wishful thinking. Before long, a nurse approached her. "They want you upstairs," she said softly, as if the words might break if spoken too loudly. Mira's heart dropped. "Who wants me?" The nurse hesitated, looking almost sorry to deliver the message. His father. She didn't need to say the name. Everyone knew who she meant. Mira nodded once. Then again, slower. She forced her feet to move. Each step felt like walking toward a storm she couldn't step away from. When she reached the private floor of the hospital, the atmosphere changed. The lights felt colder. The silence was deeper. 2 suited men stood near Ethan's room, and Mira immediately knew they weren't doctors or staff. They were hired guardsmen who listened only to orders and nothing else. One of them opened the door. Without a word, inside, Richard Marlowe stood by the window with his back facing her. The sunlight pushed through the glass and outlined his tall frame, making him look more like a statue than a man. He didn't turn around when she entered, and that made her even more nervous. Ethan was awake, sitting slightly upright in the bed. His eyes moved to her the moment she stepped in. There was worry in his expression, but also something softer, something like hope. Richard finally spoke, his voice sharp and cold. "Close the door." Mira did as asked. He waited a few seconds before turning around. His eyes were intense, not angry yet, but full of questions he wanted answered. "You're the girl they spoke about," he said. Mira kept her voice steady. "My name is Mira. I work here." "I know who you are," Richard said, stepping closer. "What I want to know is what you think you're doing. My son wakes up after weeks, and the first thing he says are the same words you whispered. Words that belong to a time you shouldn't remember." Ethan shifted. "Dad, stop. This isn't her fault." Short raised a hand slightly. "I'm talking to her right now." Mira took a slow breath. "I didn't mean to cause trouble. I only said the words because I remembered them. Because I remembered him." Richard's expression tightened. "You shouldn't remember anything. That day was handled years ago. Sealed." He paused, then added, "Forgotten." "For you," Mira said gently, "but not for the people who lived through it." "Not for me. For the first time." Richard's face flickered with something that looked like guilt or maybe fear. "Tell me exactly what he told you," Richard demanded. Mira looked at Ethan instead of his father. Ethan gave her a small nod as if encouraging her to speak, so she told the story. She told him about the day her family was forced out of their small apartment by Marlowe Enterprises. She told him how security guards pushed people out into the street, how her mother tried to gather their belongings, while her father begged for more time, and she told him about the boy who broke away from the chaos. The boy who found her sitting on the curb crying because they had nowhere to go. The boy who knelt beside her and whispered, "I'll fix this someday." Those 4 words. The same words she whispered back to him when he was lying unconscious. When she finished, the room felt heavier. Richard swallowed hard, his jaw tightening. "That was years ago," he said quietly, almost to himself. He was a child. He didn't understand. Ethan spoke up. "I understood enough. I saw what your company did. I saw how it hurt people. I never forgot, Dad. I just didn't know how to face it." Richard turned away again, gripping the edge of the window frame. His voice cracked just slightly. "You don't know what you're talking about. There were decisions that had to be made." "The company was hurting people," Ethan cut in. "Pushing families out without help, destroying neighborhoods. I saw it." Richard shot him a warning look. But Ethan didn't flinch. "Now you know someone who lived through it," Ethan added. Nodding toward Mira, Richard stared at her, as if seeing her for the first time as an actual person instead of a problem that needed to go away. "You should have come to me," Richard said to his son. "Come to me instead of what? Waking up? Surviving?" Ethan's voice rose. "Myra didn't do anything wrong. She reminded me of something I needed to remember."
Ow.
Richard's eyes narrowed. "She reminded you of something that could ruin us." He looked at Myra again, more carefully this time. "If you think you can use my son to get money or attention, I don't want anything from you," Myra interrupted, her voice firm. "I never wanted anything. I only wanted the truth to matter." Richard stepped closer to her, studying her face. Why whisper those words to him after all these years? Why now? Mira thought for a moment. "Because he looked lost," she said quietly. "And I remembered that he once looked at me the same way. And saying those words felt like giving him something back." Ethan's eyes softened. "Those words pulled me out of something dark," he admitted. "I heard her, even when I couldn't move. I heard her." For a long moment, no one spoke. Richard finally sighed, but it wasn't out of relief. It sounded like someone realizing a door they thought was locked had just swung open. He walked toward the exit, then paused with his hand on the door. "I need time to think," he muttered. "This changes things." And then he left. When the door shut behind him, the room felt warmer, as if a storm cloud had finally passed. Ethan let out a tired laugh. He's going to try to fix everything now, in his own way, probably with more money than needed. Mira gave a small smile. "People fix things in different ways." "How do you fix things?" Ethan asked. She looked at him with honest eyes. "By showing up, by telling the truth, by remembering what matters." Ethan held her gaze. "Thank you," he said softly. "For coming yesterday, for saying those words, and for not being afraid to tell my father the truth." Myra's cheeks warmed. "I was afraid," she admitted, "but I came anyway." "That's what makes it strong," Ethan whispered. A gentle quiet filled the space between them. After a moment, Mira looked toward the door. "I should get back to work. They'll notice I'm gone. Will you come back later?" Ethan asked. Late evening light settled over the quiet city as a silver car rolled down the wide road, its wheels whispering against the pavement. Inside the car sat a young man named Ethan, the only child of a man many people feared and respected at the same time. Ethan did not like the image people had of him. Most people believed he lived a perfect life filled with money, comfort, and anything he wanted. But Ethan knew the truth. He carried a loneliness inside him that even he did not fully understand. Being the son of a powerful businessman had taken away more from him than it had given. He was driving home from a meeting his father insisted he attend. The air inside the car smelled faintly of leather, and the music played softly in the background. Ethan felt tired. His head leaned slightly toward the window, and at times his eyes blinked slowly, fighting sleep. He kept telling himself he would be home soon, and everything would feel lighter. But fate had its own plans. As he reached a sharp turn near the river bridge, another car came speeding from the opposite side. Ethan did not even have enough time to think. He turned the wheels sharply, and the silver car skidded. The sound of metal scraping echoed through the empty road. Lights flashed. Tires screeched, and then everything went dark. Sometime later, people heard the crash and rushed to call an ambulance. The paramedics worked quickly, lifting Ethan from the crushed car and placing him gently onto a stretcher. His face was pale, and his breath was faint. The ambulance raced toward the city hospital, its lights flashing through the night. At the hospital, doctors hurried to stop the bleeding and check for injuries. Despite their efforts, Ethan did not wake up. After several hours, they informed his father, Richard, that his son had slipped into a coma. Richard stood still for a moment. His face did not show much emotion, but inside him, something shook quietly. He was not a man who expressed feelings easily. His life had always been about power, deals, and keeping control. Now, he was facing something he could not control. He arranged the best care for his son. A private room. The finest specialists. Nurses who would check on Ethan every hour. For days, Richard sat beside his son's bed, staring at the still body and the machines that kept him alive. The doctors said it was uncertain how long Ethan would remain in this state. It could be days or even months. Richard did not say much. He simply nodded. As if agreeing with something he could not change, in the same hospital worked a young woman named Mira. She came from a small neighborhood far from the tall buildings and shining streets of the city center. Life had never been easy for her. Her family struggled with bills, rent, and basic needs. Mira had taken a job at the hospital doing cleaning and night shifts, anything to help support her mother and younger brother. She was quiet and gentle, always doing her work with care and respect. One night, when the hallways were calm and most lights were dimmed, Mira pushed her cleaning cart down the corridor that led to Ethan's room. She had seen many patients in different conditions, but something about this room made her move more softly. She had heard the nurses whisper about the young man who had everything, yet now lay helpless. Trapped in silence, Mira entered the room slowly. The soft sound of the machines filled the air. The room was clean, almost too clean, with the faint smell of disinfectant lingering. Ethan lay still on the bed, his face peaceful, as if he was simply sleeping. Mira looked at him for a long moment. She felt a strange pull in her heart. She did not know him personally, but she had seen him once many years ago. In a moment she would never forget. She remembered being a child. Standing outside her family's small apartment as people hurried around, boxers piled up, neighbors talked in worried tones. Her family was being forced out of their home because the building had been bought by a large company. She did not know much about the company, except that people said its owner was wealthy and powerful. Everything happened fast, and her mother cried as they packed their things. Myra remembered standing alone near Myra's entrance when a boy about her age walked toward her. He had kind eyes and held a small folded paper in his hand. He slipped it into her palm before anyone noticed. When she opened it later, she saw 4 handwritten words. Words she never forgot. Words that gave her a strange mix of comfort and sadness for years. She never knew who the boy was or why he cared. Now looking at Ethan, she realized he was that boy. His face had grown older, sharper, more mature. But the eyes closed now still carried that same quiet gentleness she had seen long ago. Her heart tightened. She moved closer to the bed, unsure why she felt the urge to speak. She thought maybe it was silly, maybe even pointless. He could not hear her. He might never wake up. But something deep inside pushed her forward. She stood near his head and looked at his still face. The machines hummed softly. For a few seconds, she just breathed in and out, gathering courage to say what she had kept inside for so many years. Finally, she leaned in slowly, her voice quiet. Almost trembling, she whispered the same 4 words he had, written for her as a child. The room felt different once the words left her lips. She did not know why, but it felt like something important had passed from her heart into the silence around them. A strange calm settled over her chest. She placed the blanket neatly over him and began cleaning the room softly, careful not to make noise. She did not see Richard standing outside the half-open door. He had come to check on his son. Unable to sleep, and had stopped when he saw a simple hospital worker whispering something to Ethan. Richard watched her quietly, unable to understand why she looked familiar or why he felt uneasy. For a man who trusted almost no one, seeing a stranger lean close to his unconscious son sent a small spark of concern through him. But he said nothing. When Mira stepped out of the room, her eyes lowered out of respect, Richard stepped back into the shadows. She walked past him without noticing he was there. Richard entered the room and stood beside Ethan's bed. He did not speak, but his mind was filled with questions he did not want to ask. Something about the young woman's presence reminded him of the past, a past he had locked away for too long. The night continued quietly after that. Mira finished her shift and walked home through the cold air, pulling her jacket closer to her body. She thought of Ethan the entire time. She wondered if he had felt anything, heard anything, or sensed the words she had whispered. She knew it was unlikely. Coma patients rarely showed signs of awareness. Still, she hoped. Meanwhile, inside his room, Ethan's fingers twitched so slightly that even the machines did not react. A soft movement, barely noticeable, but real. Morning came slowly. The sun rose over the city, casting warm colors through the hospital windows. Nurses began their rounds and doctors reviewed charts. The hallway buzzed with new energy. When the doctor entered Ethan's room, she froze. Ethan's eyes were open. At first they were unfocused, blinking slowly as if adjusting to the world after a long sleep. The doctor called out for support, and soon a few nurses gathered around. They spoke to him gently, asking if he could hear them. Ethan's lips parted. His throat was dry, and his voice cracked as he tried to speak. No one expected him to say anything meaningful so soon, but he did. He whispered the exact same 4 words. Mira had whispered the night before. The doctor stepped back in surprise. The nurses looked at one another with confusion. No one in the room understood the meaning of the phrase, but they all knew it was unusual, almost impossible. When Richard arrived minutes later, he found the room filled with astonished faces. His eyes moved immediately to his son. When Ethan repeated the 4 words once more, Richard felt something cold spread through his chest. Those words, those same 4 words, he knew them, and he knew exactly what they connected to. For the first time in many years, Richard felt real fear. Not the fear of losing power, not the fear of losing money, but a fear tied to a memory he had hoped would never return. He turned to the doctor and demanded to know who had been in the room overnight. His voice was sharp, urgent, unusually emotional. The doctor explained that only the night staff had been around, and one of them, a quiet young woman, had spent a little extra time in the room while cleaning. Richard felt his breath shorten. A young woman? Could she know something? Why would Ethan say those exact words only after she visited? He ordered that she be found and brought to him immediately. But Mira, unaware of the storm forming around her, had already returned home to prepare breakfast for her family. She had no idea that her whispered words had awakened someone who was supposed to be unreachable. And she had no idea that those same words had shaken a powerful man to his core. The city moved through its morning routines. Unaware that a buried past had just started to rise again, pushed to the surface by a poor girl and 4 quiet words spoken in the stillness of a hospital room, and nothing would remain the same after this. The news of Ethan waking up spread quickly through the hospital. Nurses whispered to one another in the hallways, surprised at how suddenly it happened. Some of them had spent weeks watching his still body, wondering if he would ever open his eyes again. Now he was awake, confused, weak, but alive. It felt like something close to a miracle. But the real surprise came when he spoke. His voice cracked, broken from days of silence, yet he said the same 4 words over and over, trying to form them clearly. No one understood what they meant. They were simple words, but the meaning behind them felt heavy, almost too personal. The nurses wrote down the phrase in his chart, and one of them called the doctor immediately. Richard arrived soon after. He walked quickly down the hallway, his expensive shoes hitting the floor with a sharp sound. His face looked tense, more tense than the staff had ever seen him. When he stepped into the room and heard Ethan say the words again, his expression changed. Something dark passed through his eyes, something he did not want anyone else to notice. He moved closer to the bed and held his son's hand. Not out of comfort, but as if trying to steady himself. Ethan looked at him with tired eyes, still adjusting to the bright lights and the voices around him. Richard leaned slightly closer and asked softly, "Who said that to you?" "Who said those words?" Ethan blinked slowly, trying to remember. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a breath came out. He was too weak. The doctor stepped in and reminded Richard that Ethan needed rest. Questioning him could wait, but Richard did not want to wait. His mind raced back to a moment in the past, a memory he had buried deep inside, a memory he hoped would never return. For years he lived as if that part of his life never happened. Hearing Ethan say those 4 words felt like a door he had locked tightly was now being pushed open. The doctor repeated her request to give Ethan time. Finally, Richard stepped away, though his body remained tense. He turned to the doctor and asked in a low voice, "Who was in this room last night?" The doctor listed the nurses on duty, then mentioned that one of the cleaning staff had stayed in the room a little longer than usual. Richard's eyes narrowed. "What is her name?" The doctor checked the logbook and found the name. Mira. Richard repeated the name slowly, as if tasting it, trying to remember where he had heard it before. But he could not place it. All he knew was that she must be connected to the words Ethan kept repeating. He told the doctor to bring her to him at once. But the doctor shook her head and reminded him she had already left. Mira worked the night shift. She would return in the evening. Richard did not like waiting, but he had no choice. He stepped out of the room and made a phone call, telling his driver to bring him documents, files, anything that might help him remember the past. He felt cornered, and he hated that feeling. Meanwhile, across the city, Mira walked into her small apartment. She placed her bag on the kitchen counter and sighed deeply. Her mother was already awake, preparing breakfast. The smell of warm tea filled the air.
"You're home early?"
her mother said gently. "They let me leave a little sooner today," Myra replied, though she did not mention Ethan. Somehow, she felt it was a secret she needed to keep, at least for now. But her mind kept replaying the moment she whispered the 4 words. She tried to tell herself it meant nothing. She told herself he probably didn't hear it. People in comas sometimes reacted, but not in meaningful ways. Still, a small part of her wondered if something had changed. Her younger brother asked her if she was tired, and she smiled and nodded. She helped set the table and tried to take her mind off the hospital, but it followed her like a shadow. Back at the hospital, Ethan rested with his eyes half open. His body felt heavy, as though he had been underwater for a long time. He heard voices, some clear, some distant. He tried to remember the dreamlike feeling he had before waking up. He couldn't understand why those 4 words felt so familiar. He felt like someone had spoken them to him long ago, but the memory remained hidden behind a thick fog. He drifted in and out of sleep. Each time he woke, he whispered the words again, almost instinctively. Nurses checked the machines and adjusted his blankets, speaking to him softly as they worked. Hours passed slowly. When evening approached, the hospital became quieter again. The day shift left, and the night workers began arriving. People greeted one another gently, careful not to disturb the resting patients. Mira returned. Wearing her simple uniform and carrying the same cleaning cart she always used. She did not expect anything unusual. She did not know Ethan had woken up, nor did she know that someone was looking for her. She began her routine, cleaning the hallways and emptying bins. She worked with quiet focus, as she always did. She tried to forget the feeling she had the night before, the strange pull she felt when she saw Ethan lying helpless. She told herself it was only sympathy, nothing more. Then the head nurse walked up to her. "Mira, could you come with me for a moment?" the nurse asked. Mira nodded politely, thinking there might be an issue with one of the cleaning supplies or schedules. However, the nurse's serious expression made her stomach tighten. The nurse guided her down the hallway and stopped outside Ethan's room. Mira froze. She had not expected to return to this room so soon. Inside, Richard stood near the window, his arms crossed. His presence filled the room like cold air. He looked up the moment Mira stepped inside. "That's her," the head nurse whispered. Mira's heart beat faster. She felt out of place, standing between expensive equipment and a powerful man who looked at her as if she had done something wrong. Richard took a slow step toward her. "You were here last night," he said. "You whispered something to my son? What did you say?" Myra stiffened. She did not know this man personally, but she had seen him on the news, in magazines, on billboards featuring his company. He was known for being strict, cold, and incredibly influential. She lowered her eyes respectfully. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to disturb him. I was just cleaning the room." Richard's voice sharpened. "You leaned close to him. You whispered something. Don't lie. What did you say?" Mira swallowed hard. She felt the pressure of his gaze, and her hands grew cold. She did not want trouble. She could not afford to lose her job. Her family depended on her income. But she had also promised herself to never lie about something important. She took a small breath and answered softly, "I said 4 words. Words someone once said to me. They were not meant to harm anyone." I didn't think he would hear them. Richard stared at her for a long moment. His jaw tightened. "What words?" Myra's throat felt dry. She shook her head slowly. "I'm sorry, sir. I can't say them. They are personal, and they were meant only for him." Richard stepped closer. "Those same words are the first thing he spoke this morning. Do you understand how impossible that is? Do you realize how serious this situation is?" His voice rose slightly, though he was trying to control it. Myra's eyes widened. "He woke up?" Her voice trembled. She looked past Richard at Ethan, lying awake on the bed. Ethan turned his head weakly toward her. His eyes were half open, but when he saw her, something flickered in them, confusion mixed with a faint recognition. "You, ... Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible. Richard moved aside slightly. Watching the exchange closely, Mira stepped forward slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. "Do you remember me?" she asked softly. Ethan blinked. His lips parted. 4... words. He breathed out, as if trying to piece together a broken memory. Mira's eyes filled with emotion. She felt a strange pull again, the same one she experienced as a child when the boy gave her the piece of paper. Richard broke the moment. "Enough. I need answers." "How do you know my son?" Mira stepped back, uneasy. "I don't know him personally, sir." "Not really. I met him a long time ago, by accident. He gave me a message once. I only repeated it." Richard's face darkened. "A message? What message?" "A promise," Mira whispered. The room grew silent. The sound of the machines became louder, filling the space between them. Richard took a deep breath, his face showing a mix of fear and frustration. "Why would he make a promise to someone like you?" he asked, though the question sounded more like he was asking himself. Mira lowered her eyes. She did not answer. Ethan tried to speak again. "I know you, ... His voice trembled. From ... before. Richard shot him a warning look, but Ethan looked too weak to notice. The doctor entered the room then, breaking the tension. She asked everyone to leave, so Ethan could rest. Richard refused at first, but the doctor insisted firmly. Reluctantly, he stepped back, though his eyes remained fixed on Mira. When Mira reached the doorway, Richard stopped her. "We are not finished," he said coldly. "You will speak to me again." Mira nodded quietly. She walked out of the room on shaky legs, her mind spinning. Everything felt too surreal. She had only whispered something out of kindness, something she thought would stay between her and the silence of the night. She never imagined it would follow her like this. Richard stayed near the window, staring out at the evening sky. The fear inside him grew heavier. He knew what the 4 words connected to. He knew what they meant. And now, after so many years, they had returned to haunt him. He whispered to himself, "This cannot happen again. Not now." Meanwhile, Mira stood in the quiet hallway, her hands trembling. She did not know what would happen next, but she felt certain her life had just changed in a way she could not yet understand. She walked slowly back to her cleaning cart, unaware that the past she thought was forgotten was about to open itself fully. and nothing would ever be the same again. The next morning arrived with soft sunlight slipping through the hospital windows. The building felt calmer, but there was an invisible tension running through certain hallways, especially around Ethan's room. Nurses moved carefully, speaking in quiet tones, as if afraid to disturb something fragile. Ethan rested with his eyes open, watching the ceiling, as if searching for answers written in the tiles. His mind felt cloudy, like memories floated just out of reach. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw a flash of a younger girl standing outside a crowded apartment building. Boxes everywhere, people crying. A moment of chaos frozen in his mind. He tried to understand why that image kept appearing, and why the 4 words felt like the key to something he wants. Promise. Richard arrived early, dressed in his usual sharp suit, but today he didn't look like the confident businessman everyone knew. His shoulders were slightly tense, and his expression carried a heaviness he couldn't hide. He stepped into Ethan's room and closed the door behind him. Ethan turned his head slowly. "Father." Richard pulled a chair closer to the bed. "How are you feeling?" "Tired," Ethan whispered. "But I remember something." "Not everything, just pieces." Richard's jaw tightened. "Tell me exactly what you remember." Ethan looked away, his eyes distant. "A building. People getting pushed out. A girl standing alone near the door. She looked scared. I gave her something. I don't know what it was." Richard stiffened. "That memory is nothing important. You were a child. Forget it." But Ethan shook his head. "I can't forget it. She was crying. You were there too. You were speaking with the building manager." Everyone looked frightened. Richard stood abruptly, unable to stay calm. "You don't understand the situation. You were too young to know what was happening." "Then tell me," Ethan answered softly. "Please." Richard looked away, avoiding his son's eyes. He had spent years burying that moment under layers of excuses and business decisions. He never expected it to resurface, especially not through Mira. But before he could respond, a nurse entered the room to check Ethan's vitals, giving Richard a moment to regain control. Outside the hospital, in a neighborhood far from the tall buildings, Mira walked along the uneven sidewalk. Her steps were quiet, almost hesitant. She carried a bag of groceries home, trying to shake away the thoughts crowding her mind. She kept remembering Richard's sharp voice, demanding answers, and the look in Ethan's eyes when he saw her. She didn't know whether she should be afraid or hopeful. She didn't understand why the past suddenly felt so close. When she reached home, her mother noticed her troubled face immediately. "Are you all right?" her mother asked. Mira forced a small smile. "I'm fine. Just tired." But her mother wasn't convinced. She reached out and placed a warm hand on Mira's arm. "Whatever it is, remember that you're stronger than you think." Those words comforted her a little. Still, she knew she couldn't hide the truth for long. Something big was happening, and soon it would reach her life fully. Back at the hospital, Richard walked to his private office inside the building. He closed the door behind him and opened a locked drawer. Inside were old documents, photographs, and reports from years ago. His hands shook slightly as he pulled out a thin folder marked with the name of a neighborhood he did not want to remember. He opened it. Inside were eviction records, complaints from families, handwritten letters begging for more time, and among those papers was a small photo taken by one of the company workers. It showed a young girl holding a piece of paper. Her eyes were wide with fear and confusion. Richard stared at it for a long time. He remembered the exact day. The company had bought the old building for redevelopment. The families living there were given little time to leave. Some resisted. Others cried. Everything happened quickly. He remembered Ethan slipping away from the security guard and walking toward one of the children. He remembered being angry, telling Ethan that their family had nothing to do with the lives of those people. But Ethan, even as a child, had a gentle heart. He had given the girl something. Richard never saw what it was. He never asked. Now he wished he had. He closed the folder with a shaky breath. "This is coming back to destroy everything," he whispered to himself. Meanwhile, Mira prepared to return to the hospital for the evening shift. She tied her hair, grabbed her small bag, and kissed her mother goodbye. The walk to the bus stop felt longer than usual. Her heart was heavy with worry. She thought about the 4 words again. She remembered the day she first heard them. She was only a child. Her family had lived in an old apartment building. The rent was cheap, and the neighbors were kind. Life was hard, but it was theirs. Then one day news spread that the building had been sold. People whispered that a wealthy company wanted the land. They spoke of big plans, luxury apartments, a shopping center, and things that had nothing to do with the people already living there. Within days, families were told they had to leave. Mira remembered her mother crying softly at night, trying to hide her tears. She remembered people shouting, pleading with building managers. Boxes everywhere. Furniture being carried out. Children clinging to their parents. She remembered standing alone near the door of her apartment, feeling small and scared. Then a boy walked up to her. He looked uncomfortable, as if he knew he wasn't supposed to be there. But he approached her anyway. He handed her a folded paper and said, "Keep this. One day it will matter." She never forgot the words written inside. They stayed with her through years of struggle. They reminded her that kindness existed even in the middle of pain. As the bus arrived, she stepped inside and took a seat near the window. She watched the world pass by, wondering why fate had brought Ethan back into her life. When she arrived at the hospital, the hallways were already busy. Nurses checked charts, doctors moved from room to room, and quiet conversations echoed softly. She pushed her cleaning cart to the storage room and prepared for her shift. Moments later, the head nurse approached her again. "Mira, Mr. Richard wants to speak with you again," she said. Mira felt her chest tighten. "Now?" "Yes, he's waiting in the consultation room." Mira nodded nervously and made her way toward the room. She knocked softly and entered. Richard sat at the table, the thin folder in front of him. His eyes were cold, but tired. "Sit," he said. Mira sat quietly. Richard pushed the folder toward her. "Do you know what this is?" She opened it slowly. Her breath caught when she saw the photograph of her younger self. Where did you get this?" "My company kept records of the building we bought," Richard said. "That day, we removed your family." Mira looked down, sadness washing over her again. "I remember." Richard leaned forward. "Why did my son make a promise to you? What did he tell you that day?" She held the photograph gently, as if touching a piece of her own childhood. "He didn't explain much. He only said the words written on the paper, and he told me he would find a way to make things right someday." Richard shook his head. "A child cannot make promises like that." "Maybe not," Mira said softly. "But he did, and I believed him." Richard stood and paced slowly. "My company cannot afford any trouble. We cannot reopen old matters. We cannot allow something small from the past to grow into a story that damages our name." His voice carried fear hidden beneath authority. Mira watched him quietly. "I didn't come here to cause trouble, sir. I never planned to see him again. What happened that day was just a memory." "Then why whisper those words?" Richard snapped. Myra flinched. "Because I felt sorry for him. He looked alone. And I remembered the boy who tried to comfort me. I thought maybe some part of him would feel peace if he heard the same words again." Richard stared at her for a long moment. Finally he said, "You will not repeat those words to anyone else. Do you understand me? Not to the staff. Not to reporters. Not to anyone." Mira lowered her eyes. "I understand." Her voice was calm, but inside she felt a small flame of defiance. She had lived through hardship. She had survived far worse than angry voices and cold threats. When she left the consultation room, she took a deep breath. She felt shaken, but she also felt lighter in a strange way. The truth of the past was out in the open, but something else waited for her as she pushed her cleaning cart down the hallway. Ethan's doctor stopped her. "He's asking for you," the doctor said gently. Mira hesitated. "Me? Why?" "He keeps saying he needs to talk to you. I think seeing you may help him remember more clearly." Mira nodded slowly and followed the doctor to Ethan's room. Inside, Ethan lifted his head slightly when he saw her. His eyes softened, not with recognition, but with a deep sense of calm. "You came," he whispered. She stepped closer. "How are you feeling?" "Better when you're here," he said honestly. Myra's cheeks warmed. She stood beside the bed, unsure what to say. Ethan studied her face. "I remember you," he said slowly. "Not everything, but something. You were crying, and I wanted to help." Her heart tightened. "You did help. You gave me hope when everything felt lost." Ethan closed his eyes for a moment. "Tell me the words again." Myra shook her head. "Your father asked me not to." Ethan frowned slightly. "Why?" She hesitated. "He's afraid of the past coming back." Ethan opened his eyes again, this time with a stronger spark. "The past already came back." The words woke me up. Myra looked at him in surprise. "Please," Ethan whispered. "I need to remember. I need to know why those words matter so much." She stood there, feeling torn between fear and truth. She wanted to help him. She wanted him to remember, but Richard's warning echoed in her mind. Before she could decide, the door opened. Richard stepped inside. She hesitated, then nodded. "If it's allowed?" Ethan smiled, the kind of smile that made him look more alive than he had since waking up. "I'll make sure it is." Mira walked toward the door, but before opening it, she turned back one last time. Something about seeing him awake and looking at her with warmth made her chest tighten in a way she wasn't ready to name. "Rest," she said softly. Ethan nodded. She stepped out into the hallway, closing the door gently behind her. But she didn't leave right away. She stood there for a moment, trying to steady her heartbeat. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know how deeply the past would rise, or how much the future might change. All she knew was that something big had started, and this time, she was right in the middle of it. The days that followed moved slowly, but carried a strange heaviness. Like everyone was holding their breath without knowing why. Mira continued working at the hospital as usual, but people looked at her differently now. Some whispered with curiosity, others with disbelief, and a few even seemed afraid of getting too close to her. She didn't let any of it stop her. She focused on doing her work, the same way she always had. But inside, she felt the shift like something huge was about to change in her life. And she couldn't tell if it was good or bad. Ethan was recovering quickly. Every day he seemed more awake, more present, more like someone who had come back to life with a new purpose. Nurses said he smiled more, asked questions, and tried to move around even when they told him to rest. He often asked Mira to visit, and she did when she had time. Not because she was required to, but because being around him felt different now, lighter in some moments, deeper in others. But while Ethan grew stronger, his father grew quieter. Richard Marlowe visited the hospital less often, and when he did, he spent most of his time behind the closed door of Ethan's room or on phone calls that sounded tense even through the walls. The few times Mira passed him in the hallway, he either looked away or gave a small nod, as if unsure whether to treat her as a threat or someone he didn't know how to thank. One late afternoon, after finishing her shift, Mira was on her way out when one of the nurses called after her. "They're asking for you upstairs again." Mira's stomach tightened. "Who is it this time?" "Both of them," the nurse said. "Ethan and his father. Together."
Higher.
Mira stared for a moment. A part of her wanted to avoid whatever was waiting. Another part of her knew she couldn't run from it forever, so she nodded and headed upstairs. When she stepped into the room, Ethan was sitting up straighter than usual. Dressed in a clean shirt instead of a hospital gown, he looked almost ready to walk out the door even though they hadn't cleared him for that yet. Richard stood near the foot of the bed holding a folder in his hands. Ethan smiled the moment he saw her. "Hey, Mira, come in. We were waiting for you." Richard didn't smile, but he didn't look angry either. His expression was hard to read. "Please close the door," Richard said, much calmer than before. Mira closed it and stepped closer, unsure what the meeting was about. Richard held up the folder. "I've spent the last few days reviewing old files from years ago. Files involving families, your neighborhood, and other places like it. Places our company. Impacted, he looked down, struggling for the right word. Mira watched carefully, not interrupting. I found things, Richard continued. Things I should have known then. Things I should have stopped. He opened the folder, revealing printed documents. There were shortcuts taken. Pressure put on communities. People treated like numbers on a page. It wasn't supposed to be that way. But it was, Myra said quietly. Richard nodded slowly. Yes, it was. And I'm responsible for that. He looked at her. You didn't imagine it. You didn't exaggerate it. What happened to your family, and many others, should never have happened. The honesty in his voice surprised her. It almost didn't sound like the same man who had confronted her days earlier. Ethan spoke next. Dad wants to do something about it. Not just apologize. Actually fix it. Richard nodded again. I can't change the past, but I can correct what I allowed to happen. I want to rebuild the neighborhoods we harmed. Make them better than before. And I want you, he looked directly at Mira, to help us. Mira blinked. Me, yes, Richard said. You understand those communities. You lived there. You know what people need? I don't want to throw money at the problem and walk away. I want real change. And I need someone who won't let me forget why we're doing it. Myra looked between Ethan and his father. The idea felt unreal. She was a hospital Janetta girl who had grown up in a broken neighborhood. Someone who had never been given a chance to use her voice in the world. And now she was being asked to help fix a giant company's past mistakes. What makes you think I can do something like that? She asked softly. Richard didn't hesitate. Because you walked into this room the other day and told the truth without fear. Most people would have kept quiet. That kind of courage can lead people, Ethan added. You changed my life when I was a kid. And again when I woke up. If anyone can guide this, it's you. Mira felt a warmth spread through her chest, a mix of fear and excitement. I'll think about it, she finally said. Richard accepted that with a nod. That's all I ask. For the next week, things moved faster than Mira expected. Ethan was discharged from the hospital and began visiting the company headquarters with his father. The media caught wind of his recovery, and cameras waited outside their building, trying to get any details. But they didn't know anything yet. Not about Mira, not about the project being planned. Mira kept working. But she spent many nights thinking, imagining what her life could look like if she accepted the offer. It felt like she was standing at a crossroads, one path familiar but quiet, the other frightening but full of possibility. During one of those evenings, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Ethan. Can you come by tomorrow? My dad wants to show you something. She didn't realize she was smiling until she caught her reflection in the window. The next afternoon, Mira visited the Marlowe Enterprises office for the first time. The building towered above everything else, its glass walls reflecting the city like a giant watching over it. Inside, the floors were polished enough to mirror your shoes. Richard greeted her with a handshake. It still surprised her how gentle he could be when he wasn't hiding behind anger or fear. He led her into a conference room, where blueprints and maps covered the table plans for rebuilding neighborhoods, parks, schools, and community centers. You inspired this, Richard said. Ethan nodded. We want you to help shape what happens next. Mira walked around the table slowly, taking in every detail. She saw hope drawn in lines and measurements. She saw new homes where broken ones used to stand. She saw children playing where empty lots once sat. But she also saw responsibility heavy, enormous responsibility. After a long silence, she finally said the words they were waiting to hear. I'll do it. Ethan's face lit up instantly. Richard gave a silent nod, almost a bow of respect. And just like that, Mira's life changed. She joined the project as a community advisor, meeting with families, gathering their stories, and turning their needs into real plans. She visited her old neighborhood, the same place that once held all her fears, and told the people there that things were going to get better, not someday. But now, months passed and progress began to show. Old buildings were repaired. Empty spaces became gardens. Children played in safe parks instead of cracked parking lots. Mira became someone people trusted, someone they looked to for guidance. And all the while, Ethan stood by her, supporting every step she took. One evening, after a long meeting with community members, Ethan walked her home. The neighborhood streetlights glowed softly, and the cool breeze made everything feel calm. They stopped outside her apartment. Mira looked up at him. "You should get some rest," she said. He smiled. "I will. But there's something I've been meaning to say first." She tilted her head. "What is it?" Ethan took a breath, not nervous, but thoughtful. "You whispered something that brought me back when I was lost. For words that meant everything." He paused, meeting her eyes gently. "Now I want to say them to you." Mira's heart beat faster. Ethan stepped closer and said softly, with the same sincerity he had the day he promised it as a child, "I'll fix this someday." Mira felt her throat tighten. "You already did," she whispered. He shook his head softly. "No, we did." They stood there for a long moment, quiet and warm, knowing that something bigger than promises had brought them here, something like fate, but built on truth and courage instead of luck. And as the wind moved through the street and the city lights flickered in the distance, Mira realized she wasn't the poor girl on the curb anymore. She wasn't someone forgotten by the world. She was someone who had changed it, and she wasn't alone.